Great, it's the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and start the presentation. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm your host. My name is Renata Santellian, and I'm the Senior Operations and Strategy Manager at Ghost Inspector. We're very proud to present our webinar in celebration of Global Accessibility Awareness Day. The purpose of GAAD is to get everyone talking, thinking, and learning about digital inclusion and people with different disabilities. For today's agenda, we'll begin with the presentation from Ivan Noé regarding the history and importance of accessibility. Following that, our founder and CEO, Justin Clem, will demonstrate how to evaluate and address common accessibility issues on your website using Ghost Inspector. We'll allow time at the end for Q&A for Ivan and Justin. Feel free to send your questions to me via the chat feature on Zoom during the presentations if you're more comfortable that way. This webinar is being recorded and we'll be posting the recording later next week on our blog. Great, so with that being said, I'd like to introduce our first and very special guest speaker. He is a first-year doctoral student in education with an emphasis in disability studies at Chapman University. He does such amazing and impactful work in his community, educating so many on the importance of inclusion. He's a great friend and colleague. Please welcome Ivan Noé.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Renata. I really appreciate it. Thank you again, Ghost Inspector team, for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with everyone. So I can do my presentation. Right. And I think we're good. Again, good morning, good afternoon. Hello, everyone. My name is Ivan Noé. I am a first-year doc student in the education program at Chapman with an emphasis in disability studies. And a year ago, I had absolutely no experience working in any capacity with individuals with disabilities. I came to this degree, to this education plan, because a stark realization that even though I've been in the industry for over a decade, I had never taken inclusivity into perspective for individuals with disabilities. I've done other forms of inclusivity, but I recognized that my work had missed the mark with such a large population of individuals. So I wanted to better educate myself, and I joined this program. Hopefully, through the year of learning and growing, and I will continue to do so, I've picked up on some information and I've learned a lot, and I hope to spread it as much as possible, especially to everyone here. I'm so grateful for everyone to be here, to have an interest in bridging the gap, in understanding the different abilities between individuals. And so with all that said, again, I did mention that my emphasis is in disability studies. And so I do want to position myself as coming from a disability studies perspective. Disability studies emerged out of the disability civil rights movement in the late 1970s. There were many civil rights movements happening concurrently, all together. Disability civil rights led to this, the educational concept of disability studies. And it's a shift from understanding disabilities from the medical model to a social model. So the medical model of disability, an individual recognizes that the impairment itself is the disability. The inability to walk is considered the disability. The inability to see is considered the disability. And the resolution is rehabilitation towards being able to walk if possible, being able to see if possible, and in short, to correct the impairment. The social model of disability, on the other hand, is this idea that people are disabled by barriers in society, not by the impairment or difference. So the inability to walk is not the disability. The disability is that not all buildings are accessible by individuals with wheelchairs. When buildings become accessible to wheelchairs, then the inability to walk is no longer disabling the individual from being able to fully access the space. And so when I speak of disabilities, I tend to mean and come from this social model. And another position that I would like to put myself and my presentation in is that disability is a global perspective of disability, in that it's the world's largest minority. And it's the only minority class where an individual can wake up one day and become a part of. So if fortunate enough to live to a certain age, we will experience a disability at one point. It's also due to the inability of us to a certain generation, we work this idea that we will eventually become disabled and we need to be prepared with the tools and the resources and a more inclusive environment. So today's goal specifically, and I have to make sure I reel myself in before I get a little too passionate. Today's goal is to understand and reconsider how individuals with disabilities use the web. I got a couple of statistics that I pulled from the CDC, which I recently learned is actually not just information about COVID-19. There's a little more there, which is very beneficial to us. But approximately 1 billion people worldwide have disabilities. And specifically to individuals that are American, 26% of adults in the United States have some type of disability. Now, breaking it down into pretty common categories, 13.7% have a mobility disability, 10.8% have a cognition disability, 5.9% are deaf or have a difficulty with hearing, and 4.6% have a vision disability. So it provides context into this large population of individuals who make up this country that may be experiencing some form of impairment when attempting to access a website. Access to information and communication technology is considered by the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, a basic human right. And websites and apps must provide equal access as well as equal opportunity to people with diverse abilities. And that's per the Convention on Rights. So the World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C, creates standards that are international for all web use. And specifically for today's topic, we're going to focus on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or the WCAG, which is developed in cooperation with individuals and organizations around the world with a goal of providing a single shared standard for web content accessibility that meets the needs of individuals, organizations, and governments internationally. And these documents explain the summary is how web content can be more accessible to people with disabilities. And when they reference web content, they refer to the information in a web page or a web application that includes natural information, so text, images, and sounds, as well as code or markup that defines structure, presentation, etc. And accessibility, and to touch base on the importance of accessibility for why the W3C created these standards, there are multiple perspectives, multiple definitions, multiple takes on what accessibility means. So a couple of items that I would like to touch on. Accessibility is about the people, the individuals who are behind the devices that need to access it, whether they're able to or not able to. Accessibility exists to provide the ability to engage and to become a part of the experience. It's also the user experience is what allows individuals to use websites and web pages to better inform themselves, to become more united with their community, to perhaps engage in several services, which we'll talk about in a few seconds. But accessibility is also making sure that people with disabilities can fully experience websites, apps, and technology without limitation. And it's important because resources are almost exclusively online. Government services, education and training, healthcare, recreation, and entertainment, to name a few examples, where individuals must have access to the internet in order to pick up on voter registration opportunities, or to pick up on any events happening in their community, or to pay their bills. There's so many resources that exist almost exclusively online in today's world. So it's very important that websites are accessible and created for the use of all individuals. It's also what allows individuals with impairments the ability to do what was once considered nearly impossible. So for example, individuals with certain accessibility technologies are able to browse the web even though they are blind, and they're able to navigate effectively on their own through certain assistive technologies and certain proper coding on sites. When websites, tools, and technologies are designed and developed so that these individuals are kept in mind. They're eligible to perceive, understand, navigate, and interact on their own. And they can also contribute to the web. And that's a big, oftentimes overlooked aspect of accessibility is the ability to contribute and to actively engage in the dialogue. So there will be instances in this presentation where I mention the opportunity to hear from individuals with disabilities and the opportunity to engage with individuals with disabilities. And that comes from the idea that contribution is just as important as information access. The problem, many websites have accessibility barriers that make it difficult or impossible for some people with disabilities to use them. Additionally, many web software tools aren't sufficiently accessible to people with disabilities, which limits their contributions on the web. And again, because I mentioned earlier that I'm approaching this from a social model, I sort of want to drive the point that the barriers exist on the website. So the inability for an individual to navigate a website because they are unable to use a mouse is not the disability. The disability is that the website is built so that a mouse is needed for navigation. That is the problem. That is why accessibility is important. And I believe that is why Global Accessibility Awareness Day, or one of the many reasons why Global Accessibility Awareness Day exists, to bring light into these barriers and to work collectively. Because for many of us who have organizations and, or companies where we want to attract as many people to our services or to our products, we want to make as many people aware of what we have, these barriers will never allow that to be a reality. Professionally, I am a university registrar at a health sciences university, and I would like to make sure that all students are able to access my policies and my procedures without having to worry about their abilities that are not, maybe I don't know exactly every student's situation. So planning accordingly and properly coding and making sure everything meets standards allows me to know that that's the case. This also involves a collaboration as an organization to remove these barriers so that people with disabilities can use and contribute to the web while supporting flexibility for different user needs. And the idea that within our organizations, there are multiple layers of individuals, multiple teams that come together that bring different pieces of the overall puzzle. But each team, when approaching a situation through an inclusive lens, works collaboratively to make sure that the organization as a whole is providing an accessible experience. And so the pressure to create, to maintain accessibility does not fall within one department. It's spread across web designers, engineers, different team leads. Everyone involved in the process has a say and has a part in the process. Range of abilities. Accessibility also helps people without disabilities. So there are instances where individuals who do not have an actual disability depend on websites and applications that have accessibility options. So a couple of examples: people using mobile devices with a small screen, shifting between different input modes. Older people with changing abilities that come of age and lose some abilities, lose some hearing, lose some vision. They may not be at that point where they consider themselves having a disability, but they may live in this liminal space where they are adjusting their devices accordingly. People who experience temporary disabilities, so individuals who are in an accident and are still rehabilitating. People who are experiencing situational limitations in the moment. If it's hard to see your phone when you're out in the sun, and you adjust the settings, you've accounted for a disability. Your vision is temporarily impaired. You've made the adjustment on your phone, and now you're able to view and access the phone. So, so far we've touched base on the idea that accessibility assists individuals with disabilities and then without disabilities. And there's also this this middle ground of individuals who are en route to experiencing a disability. And people like to use the abilities they have. There may be some degeneration, but there may be a slow move towards full reliance on assistive technology. Individuals who are losing their hearing may have a hard time accepting the need of a hearing aid, or an increase in magnification on glasses, or even the use of a screen reader. So accessibility options assist these individuals in fully accessing and experiencing websites, because examples, ability to increase text size to make reading easier. If you have partial hearing, you'll have sound on, but you'll need captioning or a transcript. And we'll talk about these in a moment. And multiple assistive technologies or multiple adaptive strategies can be used at the same time. So what we've discussed so far in the past few slides is that accessibility, when in the context of a universal design, captures the experiences of individuals with, without, and in between disabilities, all by just following the W3C standards for accessibility. And that is ultimately the goal, is that when your website accounts for anybody with a need, you account for everybody on the spectrum. And there are multiple ranges of abilities that we focus on. The four that I'm going to touch base the most on this presentation are visual, hearing, motor, and cognitive. So visual abilities, whether you have low vision, whether you're fully blind or experience color blindness, the need for additional resources so that you're able to better access your tools, screen readers, high contrast settings, magnifiers, hearing abilities, whether you're deaf or hard of hearing, or whether you're just temporarily in a noisy environment, the use of captions and subtitles, the use of transcriptions, that absolutely increases the ability for individuals to hear better. Mobile limitations, so the inability to, as I mentioned a few moments ago, navigate them with a mouse, the inability to use a keyboard, the need for speech to text. These are all limitations that affect motor abilities. And then cognitive disabilities, which fall under the umbrella of your learning disabilities, dyslexia, ADHD, digital content layout is very important. And the idea that order needs to allow users to, the website needs to allow users to flow through pages to understand what they're seeing, how they're navigating it, and the organized information needs to make sense so that successful navigation can occur. All four of these range of abilities are highlighted in separate assistive technologies or adaptive technologies, and we'll touch base on them, especially for those of you in the webinar who have a hand in web design. You'll see some suggestions and some rationale behind those suggestions, and possibly provide you with reinvigoration to understand why these standards exist the way they do. I'll go over color contrasting and page elements, as well as text wrapping, layout clarity, touch base on screen reader considerations, transcription captioning, speech recognition, and keyboard compatibility, excuse me. First, color contrasting and page elements. So we ask ourselves, is there enough contrast between text and its background color? People with low vision need content to have enough contrast to read. So you choose colors with good contrast, navigation becomes easier, and sufficient contrast between foreground and background for text, images, links, icons, and buttons is important. You want to make sure that your contrast between the text and the background is greater than or equal to, the current standard is 4.5 to 1 for small text and 3 to 1 for large text. As far as the dependence on color, can you still understand everything the design is communicating without depending on the color of text or language? People who are colorblind, so for example, if you're red-green colorblind, you can't reliably make sense of information that is conveyed with color alone. Using color alone creates a barrier for these individuals to navigate. Icons with written content and other visual elements that are assessed to these items. So for example, instead of saying click the green button, which may or may not appear green, adding text to reference the button and what it is with actual written text will reinforce clear communication of the content. Large links, buttons, and controls are also a movement towards accessibility, because it's oftentimes difficult to hit a small target, and it requires a lot less effort when you have any difficulty or impairment with navigating a website using a mouse. So if it takes, links are very small, then individuals with a mouse are unable to actually click right away, and it becomes a frustration. And customizable text isn't always a question of preference, but sometimes a necessity. And properly coded websites that allow for size, font spacing, and color of text to change without loss of clarity really improve the experience. And I know that I sometimes on my phone will switch to a larger text size in the event that I need to be able to read text clear. And so that's something that just because it's coded and it allows me the need, I can temporarily engage in that service. But oftentimes there are individuals that depend upon that. So that when websites and apps are built accurately, that information is available. Text wrapping, when people with low vision increase the text size and the text doesn't reflow, they sometimes have to scroll horizontally several screens to read a single line of text. And additionally, the scroll bar and cursor is harder to find for some of them. So getting from the end of a line of text, scrolling back left, and then finding the beginning of the next line takes considerable attention, and it degrades reading flow, comprehension, sometimes significantly enough to effective reading is not possible when horizontal scrolling is required. So it's difficult to imagine when you are relying upon a screen to scroll horizontally and vertically to read through large bodies of text if the text has to be magnified to size 38 or size 48 font. But when text wrapping is implemented in all pages, this no longer becomes an issue. Individuals are able to simply scroll vertically, which allows them the ability to continue, and individuals with low vision, they're able to continue reading and comprehend what they're reading. Layout clarity. A clear layout and design ultimately is the goal, and good design and a good layout are sources of a better user experience. And that involves having clear headings, navigation bars, and consistent styling across the board. When websites are clearly laid out and designed, individuals are able to understand the flow of subsequent pages, and they're able to better navigate. Notifications and feedback are also important elements of pages and apps. Error messages that are complex and confusing may prevent users from understanding how to address the situation. So if the error message pops up and it references a backend code so that the user is then expected to relay that code to possibly a customer service agent or to search what the error message means, individuals who don't necessarily navigate smoothly or as quickly as others may be unable to engage in that search. They may become frustrated and they may end up not continuing on. That creates a loss of a customer, a loss of a guest, a loss of an interaction. It's also generally a concern for people with cognitive disabilities, but everyone truly benefits from clear messaging. Error messages that pop up and explain exactly what's happening, those tend to provide the most clarity. And it's an effort to make sure that everyone is eligible to understand what's happening with the messages. Screen reader consideration. Screen readers are a hot topic in accessibility. They read for individuals the text on a page. They do require well-structured headings and headers for smooth navigation. And if websites are not properly coded with heading, or if the text is not properly inputted, the screen reader is incapable of providing full coherence. So the text continues and goes on, and it doesn't stop at headings. It jumbles. Links should also include text that say read more, because links that say read more prevent the individual relying upon the screen reader to know what exactly the link is re-navigating the individual to, or where the link is taking you to. Clear link text is important so that a reader can identify the context behind the text. So when you set up a link, you want to make sure that when a screen reader reads that link, it knows exactly where the page will take you to know that this is the correct link that I would like to click on if I'm a user dependent upon the screen reader. All text or a short description of an image is an invaluable tool to include on images, because individuals who are hard of seeing or blind can understand references to photos by having the screen reader review what the image is, and they depend on that alt text. And screen readers can also count items within a list and name items in the list. Screen readers are not just used by people who are blind, but they also allow people with low vision who can see some of the text but require that additional assistance. And some people with cognitive disabilities who see just fine, but they have difficulty processing written text and can process spoken language better. So this resource intended for one population, because it has features that are used by multiple populations, becomes an adaptive technology that really runs the gamut and provides support for most individuals. So increasing the inclusivity and really bridging the gap on a universal design. Transcription and captions. Transcripts should be uploaded videos should include transcription, which allows individuals and users to skim and read rather than watching the video, significantly making it easier and quicker for many users who may be unable to hear. And also allows for the use of this information offline. They can be printed and converted to Braille. So transcripts, ensuring that all videos include a transcript when uploading to your pages or your websites, and having the users be able to print and convert as necessary, possibly to increase font size, creates an accessibility where those who have a hard time hearing can now engage in a video. Captions also make videos accessible in a loud environment where users cannot hear the audio, such as airports, or a quiet environment where users cannot turn on sound, such as a library. Captions allow us as users to read the language and should always be included in videos that are posted online. People who can't understand spoken language well, but understand written language better, also benefit from captions. And people who are learning to read, including those that are learning any language, benefit from captions as well. Speech recognition can be used for dictating text in a form or field, as well as navigating to and activating links, buttons, and other controls. So most computers and mobile devices have built-in speech recognition functionality, and these tools allow complete control over computer interaction and allows individuals to scroll the screen, copy and paste text, and activate menus and perform other functions simply with their voice. This works for individuals who have temporary limitations, broken arm, but it also works for users who prefer to speak rather than type. So they're multitasking. So these are just examples of liminal space users who are benefiting from speech recognition. The content must be properly designed and coded so that it can be controlled by speech. And it's important for the end users or the web designers and any team, any individual who goes into planning needs to be able to ensure that keyboard compatibility is the basis of the coding. In addition, labels and identifiers for controls in the source code need to match the visual presentation so that it's clear which speech command will activate a control. And finally, the keyboard compatibility. Per the W3C requirements, all functionality must be usable with the keyboard so users can access and move between links, buttons, forms, and other controls using the tab key and other keystrokes. Websites should not require a mouse. So for example, a pop-up calendar. Users should also be able to enter in a date instead of having to manually click the date. And this is because not all users will use a mouse for navigation. Some will depend upon a keyboard, an accessible keyboard, and that's the only manner in which they're able to navigate. These are just a couple of examples of adaptive technologies, assistive technologies, and ways in which you can increase accessibility on your end. So this is where I end, and I'm tossing it over to our friends at Ghost Inspector. Proper coding is crucial. Companies need to work top down to recognize current limitations and build features that ensure their websites and apps must be properly coded. It's important to act upon and understand legal requirements, and ensuring accessibility should be made with the intent to improve the web for all users. From my perspective, I come from a humanist point of view where I believe that it's important for all individuals to access the information. And even though it's standardized and even though there are regulations that we follow, the intent should be to making sure that everyone has access to the information that you are providing. And it creates opportunities for individuals with disabilities to provide feedback directly to your team. And that is, again, for me, as someone who is studying to learn more about disability studies, the best information is always going to come directly from the source. If you engage and if you provide ample opportunities, you create an environment where individuals are seen, heard, and they're able to assist you with increasing your functionality, and it creates a better user experience for all. So I'm going to thank everyone for your time, and I'm going to pass the mic back to Renata. So appreciate everything, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Ivan. That was a great presentation, a lot to think about. And now we're going to sign over to Justin Clem. He is our founder and fearless leader here at Ghost Inspector, and he will go over a demonstration of our new accessibility feature and how to prepare and write tests so you can start making these checks on your web app or website and make sure that you are making these accessibility checkpoints on your apps. So I'll hand it over to Justin now.
Thanks, Renata. Can you just confirm that my screen is coming through?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Justin Clem. I'm the founder and CEO of Ghost Inspector. I'm really excited to be here. Today is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. This is something that's important to us and, that we've been thinking about more and more lately. And I'm really excited to kind of dive into the details of how this works, look at some options for testing accessibility, and then talk about Ghost Inspector's new accessibility testing feature, which we think is going to be really helpful in detecting some of these issues in your code. Before I start, I just want to give a big thank you to Ivan for being with us today and giving us such a thorough background on accessibility. And I'm going to work to kind of elaborate on some of those points and kind of do a little more of a technical deep dive on some of the coding aspects. I also want to give a big thank you and welcome to all of our guests. Whether you're new to Ghost Inspector or you're a customer, I really appreciate you being here today and joining us for this. So what I'd like to do to demo this is I'm going to walk through, for those of you who are new to Ghost Inspector, and we're going to build an automated test. We'll talk a little bit about what Ghost Inspector does, and then we'll kind of circle back and we'll dive into accessibility testing, what it is that we're looking for, and how Ghost Inspector can help you. So if you're an existing customer, the first 5 minutes or so are going to be a little bit of a review. We're going to build out a basic test. So just bear with me. We will dive into the accessibility stuff. But if you're new to Ghost Inspector, just a little bit of background about us. We're an automated testing service. And what we aim to do is make it easy for you to build or record tests for your website or application, basically carrying out the types of actions that users are going to be doing so that you can make sure those things are working. So things like adding items to shopping cart, checking out, logging in, submitting contact forms. We allow you to record yourself performing those actions and automate them so that they can be run with an automated browser and Ghost Inspector service, and you're not having to do it manually every time to test. So I'm going to pop over here to the Ghost Inspector application. This is our dashboard where we show you what's going on with your tests. We have some tests here already that are grouped into what we call suites. It's basically just a grouping of tests. You can get an idea of what's passing and failing. We have folders for organizing things and so on. What we also have up here is a recording extension, and this is available in Chrome and Firefox. If you've used our service, you've probably used this before. And this lets you record yourself performing actions and turning it into a reproducible test. So we're going to go ahead and create a test, and then we're going to augment that test with an accessibility testing layer on top of it. So I'll jump over here one more tab. What I've got here is just kind of like a sample online store, right? So, something you may have seen before. We got some products, things we can add to our shopping cart and check out. And let's assume for a moment, maybe I'm the owner of the store, maybe I'm a QA tester and I'm in charge of quality assurance. And I've been going through this site, to make sure that it works properly. Anytime there's a deployment, I'm manually testing it. And I want to be able to just create some automated tests to make sure some of the core things of this store are working. So maybe like a good example that we'll try is adding a product to the shopping cart and making sure that we can properly add a product to the shopping cart. I'm going to come up to the Ghost Inspector extension, and the first time I launch this extension is going to have me sign in, and it'll connect to my Ghost Inspector account. And at that point, I can start creating new tests. I can add on to existing tests and so on. So I'm going to just create a new test here. I'll start recording. You can see the extension gets a green background here. That means it's going to capture what I'm doing. So we'll just come down here and maybe we'll come over this first product and we'll click on details. We get kind of this modal pop-up overlay and we can add it to the cart, right? So I'll add it to the cart here and I get this message. So what I'm going to do as part of my test is I've added this to the cart. I'm getting this message. I want to confirm that this message showed up, right? So I'll come up to the extension. I've been recording my operations, but what I'm going to do now is switch over to this make assertions mode. And I get kind of like a crosshair that highlights elements. And what I can do is click on an element. And as part of my test, it's going to make sure that that showed up. So in this case, we're going to click this added to cart message, and it's going to capture an assertion, basically a confirmation in my test to make sure that message is there. Now I'll come back up and I can switch back over to operations. I'm going to close this pop-up. Let's navigate to the cart. So you can see I've got the item in the cart. And I'm going to do another confirmation, another assertion here just to be safe and make sure this is in my cart. So I'll come up to the extension again. I'll switch over to make assertions. And I'm going to click on the product name, right? I added this cup planter. Let me make sure this is in my cart with an assertion. I'll record it and I'll come back up. Now I could start recording more operations. I could start filling out this form, but we'll just stop there. We'll call this our add item to cart test. We're putting it in our demo suite. We're going to do a screenshot comparison. I'll talk a little bit about that, an initial test run, and we'll save it. So, as you know, if you use it, what the extension does is it records those actions, the assertions, it creates an automated test out of it, and it sends it to Ghost Inspector. So I get a link to that test now. You can see I've got this add item to cart test. And Ghost Inspector is launching an instance of it. So now on our servers, we're launching an instance of Chrome. And you can see we've set kind of a default screen size and a default geolocation here. All of these things are customizable. But we're actually launching Chrome and we're performing those same exact actions. So we're opening up that product, we're adding it to the cart, we're doing the assertions, and then we're going to create a result that runs through those steps and creates a video and takes a screenshot and gives it back to us. So here we've got our first result of the test run. You can see some details up top. This took Ghost Inspector 40 seconds to run. Down the left side here, you get kind of the functional aspect. So you can see these actions being carried out. We're clicking, details. We're clicking add to cart. We're asserting the message. These are called selectors. So this is basically a way for us to target elements on the page. And we'll talk about this when we get into accessibility, because this accessibility, our testing feature also involves elements and gives you a way to kind of figure out what it is on the page that's having an accessibility issue. But as you see, we can continue down, we make it to the checkout. Eventually we perform this assertion, right? Over on the right side, we get a video that runs through, what Ghost Inspector saw. You can see it, adding the element, checking the cart, checking that the product is there, and so on. So you can use that to kind of review what Ghost Inspector saw. And then finally, we get a screenshot at the end of the test. So this is showing, exactly where I ended up when I performed it, this cart screen. And what we do is we continuously compare this screenshot each time the test is run to look for visual issues. So this is kind of like a traditional Ghost Inspector test, right? We've got this functional aspect over here to make sure that I can perform these actions and make sure that I can add a product to the cart. We've got this visual aspect so that I can ensure that the page looks the way I'd expect it to look. And now with our accessibility testing feature, what we can do is add accessibility checks as well to make sure that our website is complying with the recommended accessibility guidelines that are out there. So before we start modifying this test, let's jump back to our homepage here. So let's talk a little bit about the technicals of accessibility on the page. When you're looking at a website in your browser, you probably know this, but every website is represented underneath by code, HTML code that specifies, what is the text, what are the links, the images, the layout. So everything you're seeing visually is represented by code underneath. And we can see that code in Chrome. We'll go to View, Developer, go to developer tools here. And we get a bunch of tools in Chrome that let us kind of inspect what's called the DOM. That's basically the code in its parsed form. And it's been broken out into these portions of the page. So you can see I can hover over stuff, and here's, our logo, and here's the nav bar and specific links. So Chrome is taking that code and it's rendering it on the screen. But, as Ivan pointed out, like lots of folks, a huge percentage of users aren't necessarily interacting with your website purely visually. They may be interacting with it by a screen reader. So actually the way they're experiencing your website is audibly, it's being read to them. And so Chrome actually has this different way of interpreting. Chrome and every browser has another way of interpreting this code and presenting it to users in those different situations. And the way that's done is, the way that's aided is by the code design itself. So you can imagine, if this screen is being read to me, unless it's being told in the code that this is an image of a plant or that this is a picture of a chair, it's not going to know. And so I need to have those captions in the code. If we're talking about, some visual impairment, you can start looking at color contrast. Like Ivan mentioned, is this text dark enough? Is the background light enough, or vice versa, for this to be, seen by someone who has a visual impairment? In terms of navigation, if someone isn't using a mouse, if they're using a keyboard, how easily can they navigate this page? And again, a lot of that is represented in the code by basically dictating, this up here is the header, right? And if I come down here, this is maybe the main content area, and this is the footer. And so if I have a keyboard and I open the page and I want to get to the footer, I need to define in the code what the footer actually is in order for a user to easily get there. So there's a huge number of things that we can do in the code itself to really make this easier for users with certain disabilities or using assistive technology. So when we're talking about kind of the technicals of checking web accessibility, we're talking about looking at the code and making sure that all of these things are defined and organized in the ideal way. There are a number of tools built into browsers that can help with this. One is called Lighthouse. That's Chrome's built-in kind of assessment tool. And that can look at various things on the page, performance, SEO, and accessibility as well. So I can open this Lighthouse tab, I can generate a report, and it's going to go through the code and assess, am I doing all the proper things in the code? Sort of an important caveat here that I want to make off the bat is that this type of automated assessment is it's really important, and there are lots of things that can be detected. I think we'll talk about this Axe plugin in a second, this Axe library. I think it checks for something like 95 different rules, and that's the library we're using. But I just want to make a note that although you can detect lots of issues in the code, it's always important to kind of put yourself in the user's real shoes. Consider using a screen reader for the Mac or for your browser. Consider navigating your website with the keyboard and kind of see what that experience is like. So I just want to add the caveat that just because you're meeting sort of the coding guidelines, it doesn't necessarily mean that every user is going to have a wonderful experience on your website. So it's kind of like a comprehensive, project. But there are lots of things that you can check just in the code itself that you can address. And a lot of them are pretty easy to address once you become aware of them. So you can see here, Lighthouse ran, it says 100% accessible. That's good. And, I can come down here and I can expand and kind of see some of the things it was checking. It checked 21 different things. You'll see these ARIA attributes a lot. Let's see, what does that stand for? Accessibility rich internet application. These are basically attributes that help add context when the page is being read aloud or when it's being navigated by a keyboard, that help add some semantic definition to what's on the page. So you can see different roles being checked. Do buttons have accessible names? Can I skip around the page? Does it have a title, language, alternate tags for images, so on and so forth? So all kinds of things here in the code itself that can be added and guidelines that can be met to make the website accessible. I'm also going to pop over here to this Axe extension. This is an extension I installed. I want to give a shout out to the DQ Labs. They've created this Axe extension and a ton of really useful tools. Axe itself is actually an open source library, and it's the same one we use to test Ghost Inspector. So I can to test with Ghost Inspector, and I can do the same kind of thing here. I can run a scan on the page, and you can see, no issues found. It is pointing at a couple of things I could review, and in this case, what it's saying is that I've got this image here and I've got this text, and it can't quite tell whether the image is light enough for this darker text. So it's just saying that may be something you want to check manually. So cool, that's good, right? I've assessed my homepage and I'm meeting all the guidelines. But what you'll find with your website is, the moment you start interacting with it and navigating, you're changing that underlying code and possibly creating accessibility issues. So if I come in here and kind of retrace my steps, right, I click details and I pop up this modal dialog. If I rerun my accessibility test, you can see now I've got an issue. I've got this one serious issue. And that issue is pointing out that this product modal dialog doesn't have a proper description. So as somebody without a visual impairment, I can see like, okay, this is a product pop-up, but if this is being read to me in a screen reader, it's not going to know what this is, what's actually on the screen. In order to fix this, we would need to add a description explaining what this pop-up is. If I retrace my steps again, I added an item to the cart. I close out of here, I come into the cart, and I run the test again. Now I've got even more issues. So you can see I've got a critical issue, I've got a serious, moderate, and the Axe library kind of groups these issues in terms of kind of like maybe like the most egregious issues that are probably going to impact the most amount of people versus something that's a little more minor, but obviously still something you could address. And various different things here. Right? I've got some color contrast issues. I've got this image of the planter and there's no description for what this is. So if I can't see this image and a screen reader is trying to explain it to me, it doesn't know what's in this picture, and it can't tell me. Landmark elements kind of relate to dividing up the page in a way almost like hotspots so that a user can jump around more easily. We're missing a header, kind of like a document structure of saying like, here's the text header for this portion or for that portion or for the page itself. So you can see as I start to use my site and dive in deeper, there are all these kind of nooks and crannies and other places where these accessibility issues can exist. And while you can use these tools to do kind of a manual audit, and that's a great idea to do that, you can see this can be pretty labor intensive to go through and scan each page and note those issues and address them. But really, I think where this really becomes challenging is once you make your website accessible, you want to keep it accessible, right? So you want to be performing these checks, often and making sure that you're not adding new widgets or portions that are inaccessible, that aren't following these guidelines. And you kind of run into that same problem that the Ghost Inspector is solving on the functional side, where you're performing these tasks, manually, and it can be really, really useful to perform them in an automated way. So that's what we've done with Ghost Inspector here. We'll jump to our test. And what we're going to do is use Ghost Inspector's accessibility testing feature to perform those same checks, but we're going to do it in this automated test so that I can run this anytime I'd like. I can run it on a schedule. I can run it after I deploy, and I can continuously monitor my site for these accessibility issues. So what we're going to do is we've already got this functional test. We're going to come in here and edit the steps. And what I'm going to do is I'll add these checks in the same place. So we want to check our home page here. So I'm going to add a step on top. And if you view Ghost Inspector, we have tons of different actions for clicking and assigning and performing JavaScript and key presses, all the types of things you would do as a user. And I'm going to come down and choose this new check accessibility feature. So this is going to perform an accessibility test, just like we did manual in the browser. It's going to do it in my automated test. Over on the right side here, I get a setting to kind of define how strict I want this step to be. Now, this step is always going to look for all the issues it can find, and it's always going to report them. So what I'm choosing here is like, when should this step explicitly fail my test? And the reason we have something like this and have kind of grouped these is that if you're just getting into this and you're facing lots of accessibility issues on your website, you may want to start with like potentially only failing if critical issues are found, and then you can start to tighten this, tighten this setting up as you solve more and more of these issues to the point where you're finally just testing everything and your test will fail if anything comes up. So just a little bit of leeway. I want to make it clear that I don't think of this as necessarily an excuse to just say, well, all right, yeah, I'm just going to test for critical issues, or I even just make this stuff optional so that it doesn't fail. I think it's really worth having your test fail if critical things are found, if serious things are found, and addressing those issues. But we do have this here for you just to give you a little bit of flexibility. So, okay, I've got my one step on the homepage. And now this is the step that opens up that product modal. So let's add a step below that, and we'll check accessibility again here. And then finally, I did a check in the cart page. So we'll scroll down. We've got the element in the cart now, the item in the cart, and we'll perform an accessibility check again here. I'll save this test and I'll run it. So what's going to happen this time is, just like all my other Ghost Inspector tests, we're going to open up the browser and we're going to walk through these steps. But this time, Ghost Inspector is going to perform that same kind of accessibility check and look at those elements, look for those rules. It uses the ACTS library that looks at, I believe, 95 different guidelines in terms of attributes being present, proper elements being used. And it'll come back and give us a report. So what we'll see, remember, the homepage didn't have any issues, but once we open that modal dialog, we had an issue. So this test is actually going to fail now when it comes back. And you can see here we are. So we open the homepage, that doesn't have any accessibility issues that we're able to find. But then we open up that cup planter modal, and here we've got this one serious issue. So it's saying the dialog should have an accessible name. We use the same grouping that the ACTS library provides here to kind of group these into minor, moderate, serious, and critical. We'll give you a count of the number of instances where the issue is encountered on the page. In some cases, you might have multiple elements that are in violation. We'll look at that in a sec. We also give you a link to explore more information about this particular violation. So we link right to DQ's website. It's a really great resource for explaining, why is this issue happening? What do you need to do to address this issue? And then we also give you the selector. So the same type of selector that we're using for carrying out actions, we provide for you here to show you the element that's in violation. So I can copy that selector. And if I'm, have the site open, let's get back to the home page here and we'll pop up this modal. I can actually come in here, a little bit of savviness in the console. I can drop this in. I can actually see, okay, here's the element that's having the issue. And in this case, it's this ARIA labeled by, that's the problem. We're saying, here's this element that's supposed to have the label, but this element doesn't actually exist, right? So that would be the issue we'd want to address. Let's pop back to this test. And just for the sake of kind of getting to the end of it, I'm going to come in and we'll make this step a little more lenient. We're just going to fail if critical issues are found. And we'll run it again. So this is just going to allow us to get the test down to this final accessibility test that had a number of issues. So we get just a little more verbose output to look at. But one of the things that we think is really nice about this feature is that you're able to slot these checks in to your functional test. So you can pop up that modal, you can log into your account, you could navigate to your account page, start interacting with the form and then perform an accessibility check. And so it really allows you to get to what I think of as like the nooks and crannies of your application, these places that you generally would need a person to navigate to and perform the check manually. With Ghost Inspector's automation, you can get in there to those places and slot these checks in. So here you can see our test failed again further down. And here's that final check. This is on the cart screen. And a number of issues here, right? We talked about the image not having alternate text, color contrast issues, landmark, elements being contained in the landmark. Those are those sort of hot spots on the page. And in cases where here, in this case, we've got, 8 of these moderate issues that are breaking this violation here, we can jump through these with these arrow keys. So we can find all of the elements on the page that are having an issue, and we could copy paste these and jump back to the site and take a look at them. This feature can be used as much as you want. It's available on all of our plans. That was really important to us to not make this a paid add-on or anything like that. This is, if you have tests, you can be in there today adding these checks. And what's really nice is you can leverage all of our other features. So you could start simple and just have a few accessibility checks in place, and you can start running that on a schedule. So if you want to check, every day that your website is accessible, or you want to set a schedule to run this once a week and make sure there's no new violations because your website was changed, you can do that. And you can also take advantage of our notifications. When the test fails, you can get email alerts or Microsoft Teams or Slack and get notified that these accessibility checks are failing. So I hope it's useful to you all. We think it's something that is really going to allow folks to add that accessibility testing layer into the testing they're already doing, and like I said, get into those hard to reach places. Some of the stats that I even gave are pretty incredible when you think about how many folks are navigating your site using assistive devices or with a disability. And I really liked the perspective of, it's really our responsibility as a website owner or operator to make the changes necessary to support those people, right? That's the disability. The disability is our website not handling those cases and offering a means to use the site. So I hope you'll consider using this feature if it's not something you're doing right now. And don't be overwhelmed by the issues it'll catch. A lot of these things, as I mentioned, can be pretty easy to address. So just awareness and making an initiative to address them is really the key.
Justin, we have some questions, 2 questions coming in that are similar. Questions about whether we can set it to be AA compliant versus AAA compliant, about the settings. I'm not sure if we can set that.
Oh, that's actually something offhand I'm not sure about. We'll need to take a look in terms of what will qualify as sort of AA compliance versus AAA. I know that the library you're using has quite a few sort of customizations, and just kind of along that same point, I will mention that I think I said check something like 95 different rules. One of the things we're considering is providing the ability to enable certain rules or disable certain rules and kind of meet the criteria that you're responsible for meeting. So we are looking at adding some additional features here, and maybe one of them could be, AA versus AAA, but off the top of my head, that's not something I'm familiar with enough to comment on.
Yeah, and along the same lines, someone's asking if it's currently our feature is customizable at any level other than the level of scrutiny currently you can select from the drop down. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I touched on that. So right now we do kind of bucket these issues in a level of severity, and so one of the things kind of off the bat that customers brought to our attention was, they wanted the ability to kind of disable certain rules or kind of customize, and there can be situations where false positives are kind of rare, but there may be situations where the color contrast is okay, but it's being flagged, or certain things that you want to kind of avoid testing just so your step doesn't fail. So it's definitely on our radar. At the moment, you cannot do that, but it is something we're actively considering and working on.
Sure. And we had one question that came in via intercom earlier today. So for someone who has zero knowledge about accessibility testing, what are some things that as a functional tester, they should look out for when testing accessibility? I guess, what are the most crucial checks when performing accessibility testing? So I can create first a baseline of accessibility checks for, say, an e-commerce site.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I don't think it's uncommon, to kind of come into this and it's just hasn't really been on your radar. So I think a really good place to start just to get your bearings is to consider, using a tool like Lighthouse just to run a couple of checks and get an understanding of what are some of the issues that I'm running into. There are actually some really great resources that we'll follow up with as well. There's a huge amount of documentation on the web about these guidelines. And actually, generally, when you think of specs and guidelines, you think they're like really terrible to read, but these are actually quite useful. There's also some other presentations on YouTube that go into even more depth in terms of like, what are these ARIA attributes and what are some of the things I need to do? So we can take the step of including some kind of getting started resources. But I would definitely encourage you to kind of poke around with some of these tools like Lighthouse, Axe, maybe throw a couple of checks into your test. And with these links that we provide, it can be a really great starting point to understand like, what are these issues? Why is this a problem and how can I address it?
Great. And with that, we are at the end of the hour. We really appreciate everyone's time. If there's any more questions or if you have any feedback on this webinar, or if you'd like to see more from us in terms of webinars, we'd love to hear it. You can always reach out to us at help@ghostinspector.com, or we're also available on our intercom widget on the bottom right-hand corner of our app or our website. But we truly appreciate everyone's time, and the recording will be live next week on our blog. Special shout out again to Ivan Noah for his time. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.